Chapter 23.
Well, I'm gonna miss once, Augustus said, as he and Call were eating their bacon in the faint morning light. Plus, I already miss my Dutch ovens. You would want to move just as my sourdough got right at its prime. I'd like to think that there's a better reason for living in a place than you being able to cook biscuits, Call said. Though I admit they're good biscuits. You ought to admit it. You've had enough of them. I still think we ought to just hire the town and take it with us. Then we'd have a good barkeep and somebody to play the piano. With Call suddenly determined to leave that very day, Augustus found himself regretful, nostalgic already for things he hadn't particularly cared for but hated to think of losing. What about the well? He asked. Another month and we'd have had it dug. We? Call asked. When did you hit a lick on that well? He looked around and saw to his astonishment that Augustus's 2 pigs were laying under the wagon, snuffling. In the half-dark, he had thought it was Bolivar snoring. Who asked them darn pigs, he said. I guess they tracked us, Augustus said. They're enterprising pigs. I guess you're planning to take them, too. It's still a free country. They can come if they want the inconvenience. Wonder where Jake camped. At that point, the late shift came riding in. Newt, P., Dish Boget, and Jasper Flant, plus a 5th man who hadn't been part of a shift. Why, it's Soupy Jones, Call said. God almighty, Augustus said. The man must have lost his wits. What few he had. Soupy had rangered with them a few months before they quit. He was brave but lazy, a fine card player, and by all odds the best horseman any of them had ever known. His love of being horseback was so strong that he could seldom be induced to dismount, except to sleep or eat. I thought Soupy married, Call said, as the boys unsaddled their night horses. That was the gossip, Augustus said. Married a rich woman and became a sheriff, I heard. Well, maybe she run off with the preacher. If she didn't, I don't know why he's out here this time of night. Soupy, a short man, came walking over with P.I. Look what rode up, P.I. said. I near mistook him for a bandit since it was pitch dark. Ay, God, Soupy, you should have waited till we lit the lantern, Augustus said, standing up to shake hands. A sharp bunch of gun hands like us, you're lucky not to be shot. Oh, Gus, Soupy said, not knowing what else to say. He had always been nonplussed by Gus's witticisms. Morning, Captain, he said. His Call shook his hand. Have some grub, Call said. He had always been fond of the man, despite his unwillingness to dismount if there was something to do on the ground. Where'd you come from, Soupy? Augustus asked. Didn't we hear you was a mayor of some place, or was it governor? I was just in Bastrop, Gus, Soupy said. Bastrop don't have no mayor. Or governor either. It's barely a town. Well, we're barely an outfit. Though we got 2 fine pigs that just joined us last night. Are you looking for employment? Yes. My wife died, Soupy said. She was never strong, he added, in the silence that followed the remark. Well, you're hired, at least, Call said. I lost 2 wives myself, Augustus remarked. I heard Jake was around, but I don't see him, Soupy said. He and Jake had been close buddies once, and it was partly curiosity about him that made Soupy want to rejoin the Hat Creek outfit. Well, he is, Call said, not anxious to have to explain the situation. Jake won't camp with us old cobs, Augustus said. He's traveling with the valet, if you know what I mean. No, but if it's traveling with Jake, I bet it wears skirts, Soupy said. A remark which for some reason seemed to catch everybody wrong. or everybody but Gus, who laughed long and hard. Feeling a little confused, but happy to have been hired, Soupy went off with P.I. to get breakfast. "I'm going in and pry up that sign I wrote so we can take it with us," Augusta said. "I may pry up one of my Dutch ovens and bring it too." "Bull ain't said that he's going," Call said. It was a mild anxiety. If Bull quit and they had to depend on Gus to do the cooking, the whole trip would be in jeopardy. Apart from biscuits, his cooking was of the sort that caused tempers to flare. In fact, Bolivar was standing by the cook fire, staring into it with an expression of deep gloom. If he'd heard the remark, he gave no sign. "Oh, Bull's got the adventurer spirit," Augusta said. "He'll go. And if he don't, he'll just have to go home and wed his wife more often than he cares to." With that, he went and got the 2 mules that constituted their wagon team. The bigger mule, a gray, was named Greasy, and the smaller, a bay, they called Kick Boy, out of respect for his lightning rear hooves. They had not been worked very much, there seldom having been a need to take the wagon anywhere. It was theoretically for rent, but rarely got rented more than once a year. Greasy and Kick Boy were an odd-looking team, the former being nearly 4 hands higher than the latter. Augustus hitched them to the wagon, while Call went to inspect the remuda, meaning to weed out any horses that looked sickly. "Don't weed out too many," Augustus said. "We might need to eat 'em." Dish Bogat, who had had little sleep and had not enjoyed the little, found the remark irritating. "Why would we need to eat the darn horses with 3,000 cattle right in front of us?" he asked. He had spent hours riding around the herd with a tight wad of anger in his breast. "I can't say, Dish," Augustus said. "We might want to change our fare for all I know, or the Sioux Indians might run off the cattle. Of course, they might run off the horses, too." "What happened to us in that Stonehouse fight?" Pete remarked. "They set fire to the grass, and I couldn't see a darn thing." "Well, I ain't you," Dish informed him. "I bet I could see my own horse, fire or no fire." "I'm going to town," Augustus said. "You boys will stand and jabber all day. Any of you want anything brought, it has to be something that will fit in this wagon. Bring me $500, that'll fit," Jasper said. There was a general laughter, which Augustus ignored. "What I ought to bring is a few coffins," he said. "Most of you boys will probably be drowned before we hit the Powder River." "Bring a few jugs if you see any," Jasper said. The fear of drowning was strong in him, and Gus's remark spoiled his mood. "Jasper, I'll bring a boat if I notice one," Augustus said. He caught Bolivar staring at him malevolently. "Come on if you're coming, Bull," he said. "No reason for you to go north and drown." Bull was indeed feeling terrible. They only talked of going, not of coming back. It might be he would never see Mexico again, or his lovely daughters if he left. And yet, when he looked across the river and thought of his village, he just felt tired. He was too tired to deal with a disappointed woman, and much too tired to be abandoned. Instead of climbing in the wagon, he turned away and sat down near the pigs. They had found a cool spot where the water barrel had dripped, and they were lying on their stomachs watching the proceedings alertly. "If I ain't back in a month, you girls feel free to start without me," Augustus said. Then he drove off, amused that Dish Bogat looked so out of sorts just from being in love with a woman who didn't want him. It was a peril too common to take seriously. A half-mile from the main camp, he came upon the very woman who had given Dish the pain. She was attempting to cook some fryback and was getting no help from Jake Spoon, who hadn't even provided her with a good fire. Jake was sitting on his bedding, his hair sticking up in the back, trying to dig a thorn out of his hand with a pocket knife. Augustus stopped the team and got down to chat a minute. "Jake, you look like you slept standing on your head," he said. "Is that a bullet you're digging out? Has she shot you already?" "Who invited you for breakfast?" Jake said. "I've et," Augustus said. "Oh, I just stopped by to set the table so you two could dine in style." "Hello, Gus," Laurie said. "Don't start no conversation, else he'll stay all day," Jake said. "I'd forgotten what a pest you are, Gus." He had got the thorn in his thumb hobbling the horses the night before, and had been unable to get it out in the dark. Now his thumb was swollen to twice its size, for a green mesquite thorn was only slightly less poisonous than a rattlesnake. Besides, he had slept badly on the stony ground, and Laurie had refused him again, when all he wanted was a little pleasure to take his mind off his throbbing thumb. They were camped only 2 miles from town and could easily have ridden back and slept comfortably in the dry beam. But when he suggested it, Laurie showed her stubborn streak and refused. He could go back if he cared to. She wasn't. So he had stayed and slept poorly, worrying most of the night about snakes. As much camping as he had done, it was a fear that never left him. "It's a wonder you ain't froze to death years ago, if that's the best fire you can make," Augustus said. He began to gather sticks. "You don't need to bother," Lorena said. "I've already burned the meat." It was good Gus had stopped, for Jake was in a temper already. Just because she had turned away from him the night before, he had a quick pride, and any refusal made him angry. As for sleeping on the ground, she didn't mind. It was at least fairly cool. "I never expected to find you still in bed at this hour, Jake," Augustus said. "You'll have a time keeping up with us if you don't improve your habits. By the way, Soupy hired on this morning, and he inquired about you." "There goes the easy money," Jake said. "Soupy will win every cent you boys can earn in the next 10 years. He's been known to win from me, and that ain't easy." "Well, I'm going to town," Augustus said. "Want me to pick you up a Bible or a few hymn books?" "No, we're leaving," Jake said. "Soon as we pack." "That won't be soon," Augustus said. "You've scattered stuff over 3 acres, just making this one little camp." That was true. They had unpacked in the dark and made a mess of it. Jake was looking for a whiskey bottle that wasn't where he thought he'd put it. It was plain camping wasn't a neat way of life. There was no place to wash, and they were carrying very little water, which was the main reason she had refused Jake. She liked to wash and felt he could wait until they camped near a river and could splash a little of the dust off before bedding down. Augustus watched them eat the poor, burned breakfast. It was eternally amusing, the flow of human behavior. Who could have predicted Jake would be the one to take Lorena out of Lonesome Dove? She had been meaning to leave since the day she arrived, and now Jake, who had slipped from the grasp of every woman who had known him, was firmly caught by a young whore from Alabama. The quality of determination had always intrigued him. Laurie had it, and Jake didn't. Hers was nothing compared to W.F. Call's, but hers would probably be sufficient to get her to San Francisco, where no doubt she would end up a respectable woman. After accepting a cup of coffee from Laurie, he took a look at Jake's thumb, which was swollen and turning white. "You better be sure you got all that thorn out," Gus said. "If you don't, you'll probably lose the hand, and maybe the arm that goes with it." "I won't lose no arm, and if I did, I could still beat you dealing one-handed," Jake said. "I hope you invite us to breakfast one of these days to repay the favor." When Augustus reached Lonesome Dove, the one street was still and empty, with only one horse twitching its tail in front of the Pumphrey store. The dust his wagon stirred hung straight as a column before settling back into the street. Augustus stopped in front of the deserted blacksmith shop. The blacksmith, an uncommunicative man named Roy Royce, had ridden out of town some months before and had not come back. Augustus found a small crowbar among the tools a man had cavalierly abandoned and rode up the street to the Hat Creek Corrals, where he easily pried the sign off the fence. The Dutch ovens were more resistant. They showed signs of crumbling, so he left them. There would be no time for leisurely biscuit making on their trail anyway. He walked through the house and had a look at the roofless barn, amused at how little trace remained of their 10 years' residence. They had lived the whole time as if they meant to leave at any minute. And now that was exactly what they had done. The barn would stay roofless, the well only partially dug. The rattlesnakes could take the spring house for all he cared. He had already removed his whiskey jug. It would be a while before he had such a good shady porch to sit on, drinking the afternoon out. In Texas, he had drunk to take his mind off the heat. In Montana, no doubt, it would be to take his mind off the cold. He didn't feel sad. The one thing he knew about Texas was that he was lucky to be leaving it alive, and in fact, he had a long way to go before he could be sure of accomplishing that much. He drove down to the saloon. At first, he thought the saloon was empty, but then he saw Xavier Wands sitting at a table near the shadowy end of the bar. He had not bothered to shave for 2 days, a sign of profound demoralization. "Darn, Wands, you look poorly," Augustus said. "I see the morning rush ain't started yet." "It will never start." "Just because you lost your whore don't mean the sun won't rise again," Augustus assured him. "Take a trip to San Antonio and recruit another whore." "I would have married her." "I ain't surprised," Augustus said gently. There were men who didn't get over women. He himself, fortunately, was not one of them, though he had felt fairly black for a year after Clara married. "I would have taken her to San Francisco. I would have given her money, bought her clothes." "In my opinion, the woman made a poor bargain," Augustus said. "I seen her not an hour ago trying to cook over a darn smoky fire. But then we don't look at life like women do, Wants. They don't always appreciate convenience." It had seemed a miracle the day she walked in the door with nothing but her beauty. From the first, he had planned to marry her someday. It didn't matter that she was a whore. She had intelligence. And he felt sure her intelligence would one day guide her to him. She would see, in time, how much kinder he was than other men. She would recognize that he treated her better and loved her more. Yet it hadn't worked. She went with him willingly enough when he requested it, but no more willingly than she went with other men. Then Jake had come and taken her. Just taken her as easily as picking a hat off a rack. But when he offered, she had merely shaken her head, and now his dreams were ruined. He remembered that when he declared his love, her eyes hadn't changed at all. It was as if he had suggested she sweep out the bar. She had only tolerated him to avoid a scene with Jake, and had seemed scarcely aware that he had given her nearly $200, 4 times as much as Gus. It was enough to buy her passage to San Francisco, but she had merely taken it and shut the door. It was cruel love. "Well, it's too bad you ain't a cowboy," Augustus said. "You look like you could use a change of air. Where's Lippy?" The last thing that would interest him was the whereabouts of Lippy. Augustus drank a glass, but said no more. "If Jake gets killed, tell her I will come." There was always that prospect. After all, he had only met Teresa because her first husband had fallen off a roof and broken his neck. A man like Jake, a traveler and a gambler, might meet a violent end at any time. "I doubt it'll happen," Augustus said, not wishing to encourage faint hopes. When he went out, he found Lippy sitting in the wagon with his bowler on his head. "How'd you get in my wagon?" Augustus asked. "Jumped off the roof, and this is where I landed," Lippy said. He liked to joke. "Well, jump back on the roof then," Augustus said. "I'm going to Montana." "Well, I'm hiring on," Lippy said. "The piano playing's over around here. Wants won't feed me and I can't cook. I'll starve to death." "It might beat drowning in the Republican River," Augustus said. Lippy had a little bag packed and sitting between his feet. It was clear he was packed and ready. "Let's go," he said. "Well, we got 2 Irishmen. I guess we can always use a man with a hole in his stomach," Augustus said. Lippy had been a fair horseman once. Maybe Call would let him look after the remuda. As they rode out of town, the Widow Cole was hanging out her washing. Hot as the sun was, it seemed to Augustus it would be dry before she got it on the line. She kept a few goats, one of which was nibbling on the rope handle of her laundry basket. She was an imposing woman, and he felt a pang of regret that he and she had not gotten on better. But the truth was they fell straight into argument, even if they only happened to meet in the street. Probably her husband, Joe Cole, had bored her for 20 years, leaving her with a taste for argument. He himself enjoyed argument, but not with a woman who had been bored all her life. It could lead to a strenuous existence. As they passed out of town, Lippy suddenly turned sentimental. Under the blazing sun, the town looked white. The only things active in it were the widow and her goats. There were only about 10 buildings, hardly enough to make a town, but Lippy got sentimental anyway. He remembered when there had been another saloon, one that kept 5 Mexican whores. He had gone there often and had great fun in the days before he got the wound in his belly. He had never forgotten the merry whores. They were always sitting on his lap. One of them, a girl named Maria, would sleep with him merely because she liked the way he played the piano. Those had been the years. At the thought of them, his eyes teared up, making his last look at Lonesome Dove a watery one. The dusty street wavered in his vision as if under a heavy rain. Augustus happened to notice that Lippy was crying, tears running down both sides of his nose and the floppy pocket of his lip. Lippy normally cried when he got drunk, so the sight was nothing new, except that he didn't seem drunk. "If you're sick, you can't go," he said sternly. "We don't want no sickly hands." "I ain't sick, Gus," Lippy said, a little embarrassed by his tears. Soon he felt a little better. Lonesome Dove was hidden. He could barely see the top of the little church house across the Chaparral Flats. "It's funny leaving a place, ain't it?" he said. "You never do know when you'll get back."